Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're going to unpack something that is highly unusual, honestly pretty fascinating, and seemingly totally contradictory. We're looking at a sequence of recent events unfolding right now between the United States and Cuba. We're going to take a step back, zooming all the way out from a single dusty fence line to view the entire Caribbean chessboard as it stands in 2026. If you've been following the news at all, you already know things are moving incredibly fast. But mapping it out like this is going to reveal a strategy that's just as complex as it is unprecedented. So, to really grasp the broader strategy at play here, we have to start with one very specific, highly unusual encounter.
And it's an encounter that immediately grabs your attention. Why are U.S. and Cuban generals meeting right now? Historically speaking, the relationship between Washington and Havana is defined by distance. It's defined by silence. It is definitely not defined by face-to-face military chats. And yet, right in the middle of a massive recent spike in regional tension, a meeting actually happened. It absolutely forces us to step back and ask, what exactly is going on behind the scenes?
Well, on May 29th, the top officer in charge of U.S. military operations across Latin America, U.S. Southern Command's Gen. Francis L. Donovan, held a very rare meeting with senior Cuban military leaders. That delegation actually included Cuban Army Corps Gen. Roberto Lagras Sotolango. And where exactly did they meet? Right at the perimeter of Naval Station Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Now, U.S. Southern Command officially described this as just a brief exchange on operational security matters, but they've kept the actual substance of those discussions totally under wraps. Gen. Donovan also used this trip to assess perimeter security, force protection, and just generally check on the safety of service members and their families living on the base. Now, to truly appreciate the heavy irony of two generals from adversarial nations meeting at this specific fence line, you really have to consider the history here. Think about the year 1903. United States forces have maintained this naval base at Guantanamo Bay since 1903. Literally, it has stood there through world wars, the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. It serves as this constant, immovable American footprint right on the island. And this geographic footprint creates an absolute political paradox. On one side of the ledger, it holds the title of the oldest overseas U.S. military base. But then, on the exact same token, it is the only U.S. military base located entirely inside a communist-controlled nation. It is a completely isolated pocket of American military jurisdiction, and it's completely surrounded by a state that has been fundamentally opposed to U.S. policy for decades. So for top brass to meet right on that dividing line, that is incredibly symbolic.
But here's the thing. This fence line meeting didn't just happen in a vacuum. It's actually the culmination of a rapidly escalating sequence of events that began early in the year. Since the start of 2026, President Trump has been steadily, relentlessly raising the pressure on Havana. And the escalation is exceptionally quick. Just look at this. In January, a capture order is issued. Fast forward to mid-May, and the CIA director is suddenly in Havana. Just days after that, a historic indictment drops. And then, boom, the month closes out with generals meeting at the Guantanamo perimeter.
When we organize these events side by side, it's like a split-screen reality. A really complex two-pronged strategy running on parallel tracks starts to emerge. On one hand, we've got highly sensitive diplomatic visits. CIA Director John Ratcliffe actually led a delegation to meet Cuban officials in Havana on May 14th. That makes Gen. Donovan the second high-level U.S. official to visit in just a matter of weeks. But simultaneously, the U.S. is deploying extreme pressure tactics. While these quiet conversations are happening on Cuban soil, the administration is executing capture orders, dropping heavy tariffs, launching criminal indictments, and firing off multiple rounds of economic sanctions targeting Cuban officials and entities. So to understand the sheer weight of that pressure campaign, you have to realize that you cannot talk about isolating Cuba without talking about Venezuela. It's basically a domino effect. The U.S. strategy deeply targets Cuba's key regional partner, Venezuela, as a primary mechanism to increase Havana's isolation. By squeezing the leadership in Caracas, the administration effectively chokes off the crucial support systems that the communist-led state in Cuba relies on to sustain itself. And this squeeze is incredibly methodical. Let's break it down. First up, in early January, President Trump ordered U.S. forces to capture then Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. The objective there was to bring them to the United States to face criminal prosecution on drug trafficking and terrorism-related charges, which, it's worth noting, they both strongly deny. Because Maduro partnered so closely with Cuba, his ouster sets the entire stage for Cuba's broader isolation. Then, weeks later, the administration authorized strict tariffs targeting any countries attempting to transfer oil to Cuba, effectively choking their energy supply. And then the vice tightened even further on May 20th. That's when the U.S. Justice Department obtained criminal indictments against former Cuban leader Raul Castro and other officials for the 1996 shoot-down of 2 planes operated by a Cuban exile group. It is, quite literally, an all-encompassing legal and economic stronghold. But wait, the administration isn't just relying on lawyers and sanctions. Alongside all these economic and legal squeezes, they are executing a massive physical show of force. 1,300. That's a big number. That represents a sudden influx of additional U.S. Marines and sailors deployed directly into the region.
And this Caribbean buildup isn't just about manpower. We're talking serious hardware. The Marine Corps cycled this element into a force that notably includes a massive aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz. The U.S. military has maintained a heightened force presence here for months now. And remember Jen Donovan, the guy who met the Cubans at Guantanamo? Well, about a week before that meeting, he oversaw a whole set of U.S. military exercises right in Venezuela. During that exercise, Jen Donovan and other personnel actually flew aboard an MV-22B Osprey directly to visit the recently reopened U.S. Embassy in Caracas. It is a staggering projection of power right in Cuba's backyard.
So, as we pull all these pieces together on the geopolitical chessboard, the paradox becomes blindingly clear, doesn't it? We have a president actively hinting at military action and intervention in Cuba. We have an unprecedented troop and naval buildup in the Caribbean. We've got severe criminal indictments against former heads of state. And yet, at the exact same time, we have the director of the CIA and the commander of U.S. Southern Command standing on Cuban ground, having quiet, direct dialogue with the Cuban government. It's essentially the ultimate display of walking softly while blatantly loading a very, very large stick. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently framed this overarching strategy in a video message, and he stated it pretty explicitly. He said, "The United States is ready to open a new chapter in the relationship between our people and our countries. The only thing standing in the way of a better future are those who control your country." That quote perfectly encapsulates the dual approach we're seeing, extending the offer of a new chapter directly to the people while squarely taking aim at the leadership currently in control. And look, this is exactly why paying attention to this matters to all of us. This isn't just some abstract foreign policy stuff. This is history with immense global security implications happening in real time, literally just miles off the United States coast.
So where does this all leave us? With aircraft carriers and Marines continuing to move into position and top American generals talking quietly with Cuban commanders at a 120-year-old fence line, we're really just left to wonder. How exactly will this contradictory and incredibly high-stakes new chapter ultimately unfold in the Caribbean? Is the dialogue a precursor to peace, or is it an ultimatum before a storm? That right there is the true Cuban paradox of 2026. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the Caribbean.